15 years ago, I proudly considered myself to be a super ultralight backpacker. But what happened is that I realized I was just going stupid light. So today's episode, we're going to talk about what stupid light is and how you might be doing it too. Hi, I'm Andrew Skurka. I'm a former thru-hiker, now guide and writer. This is a weekly series that I do at the Trek. We drop a new video every Monday at noon Mountain Time. If you've enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe. As they might say, smash that subscribe button. To give you extra motivation to leave a comment for a future upcoming mailbag set episode, we are giving away the Trek branded buffs. So go ahead and leave a comment below, ideally with a question or just a really good comment, and maybe you'll win. Stupid light is essentially becoming so obsessed with the net weight of something that you take it too far and you end up compromising your backpacking experience either by undercutting your safety or your comfort or your efficiency. Weight is not the only thing that matters on a backpacking trip. I started seeing some of my own patterns as being stupid light probably like 20 years ago now. And at that time in my backpacking trajectory, I had this attitude where I was like, light is right, pack less, be more, light is better. But I started to see that my decisions were, they weren't holistic enough. I wasn't seeing sort of the forest for the trees. One of my favorites, and we'll have a photo of it, is where I decided that I was going to hike the Colorado Trail with a short sleeve rain jacket. Colorado in July during a monsoon up at 13,000 feet. What could go wrong? Another example, I was encouraged before leaving for a particular trip in the Absaroka Range in October that I should leave behind a critical item just to kind of see how it went. So I left behind my water bottle and I decided to use a Ziploc bag, a quart-sized Ziploc bag from breakfast on the first morning as a water bottle instead. Didn't work that well. Another example I can think of, Sierra High Route in 2008 with Buzz Burrell. We were there in the beginning of July, expecting mosquitoes, but not knowing how horrific they could be. And we both decided in the interest of saving weight that we would leave behind head nets. And man, I don't know how much a head net weighs. Actually, I do. Hold on. This head net weighs 0.365 ounces. And if you leave one behind and you need it, you'll really regret it. Let me keep going with the list. In 2004, 2005, I walked 7,775 miles from Quebec to Washington State. And for most of those miles, I carried with me a poncho tarp. So that's a poncho tarp it's basically a tarp with a hood. This weighs, it weighs more than 3 ounces, I'll tell you that. I think it was in the neighborhood of like 10 ounces. So on average, it's 5-ounce rain gear and 5-ounce shelter. But what you realize if you've ever used a poncho tarp, especially in wet conditions, is that it's not very good rain gear and it's not a very good shelter. Chalk that one up in the stupid ultralight category. Another example that I see often are if there's like one piece of gear that embodies stupid ultralight, it's these titanium skewer stakes. So this weighs 0.229 ounces, which is probably about half the weight of my favorite stake. These are the Easton aluminum nail stakes. This weighs, 0.44 ounces. So this stake is twice as heavy. But here's the thing about these. They don't hold anything. They bend really easily. So if you're using a shelter that's a trekking pole shelter where your pitch is only as good as your weakest stake, then these are kind of worthless. And congratulations. If you carry 8 of them, you've saved yourself 1.6 ounces or something like that. But a stake like this, you can pound them into rocks. You can, they hold really well. And just totally worthwhile carrying a little bit more weight for something that performs much better. When blogs were a thing, I wrote a blog post on my journey through stupid light. And I referenced all these examples, some of which I've given you, a couple of others that I can think of as well. So for example, sleeping on a closed cell foam pad in Glacier National Park where the campsites are designated. So the campsites themselves are super hard packed. So like a closed cell foam pad, lighter weight than an inflatable, but man, when you're essentially sleeping on gravel, they're not very comfortable. So yeah, I posted this, and it kind of went viral back in the day, and I think it sort of represented maybe this turning point in like the evolution of ultralight backpacking. I remember a New York Times article. I was in the New York Times, and it was from like 2003, 2004, and the title was something like ultralight backpacking, the new trend in backpacking, but is it safe? Because at the time, the champions of ultralight backpacking were all pushing these like kind of these fringe ways to save weight. I remember the article specifically referenced this trip where someone decided to use their sleeping bag as their insulated jacket as well. So it was kind of just pushing the edges of ultralight backpacking, trying to figure out what the limits were, where I think we were all in agreement that packing less, like just purely like fewer items, but also packing lighter weight items, that absolutely led to a better backpacking experience, especially for hiking intensive itineraries like a thru-hike or some like hard charging go-getter weekend warrior itinerary as well. So we were all in agreement that yeah, lighter was better, but I think we were also finding what the limits were, that like sometimes it actually didn't make sense to take less. Maybe sometimes it didn't make sense to carry that lighter item because it cut into other things that are important to a backpacking experience. So for example, like what are your safety margins? What's the value of being comfortable? What is the value of just having of a backpacking trip being fun and enjoyable? So as an example, in my early days, I never carried a coffee cup, like a dedicated coffee cup, because I was like, well, I can drink coffee out of my pot, but it's really nice just to have a dedicated coffee mug. And the other thing that it does is it's also quite a bit more efficient because I can make a bunch of water in this for breakfast and for coffee. And then I can be eating breakfast and drinking coffee at the same time versus having to cook or having to boil water twice. So again, safety, efficiency, fun, comfort. If you start cutting too much weight out of your pack, either by taking less or by taking items that are too light, you're going to start to feel the limits in those regards. It's a lot easier to have a crazy light pack nowadays without compromising much. The quality of the equipment and the performance of the materials is just vastly superior. So suppose something like, for a couple seasons now, I've been using the Hyperlight Mid. Okay, so here's the Hyperlight Mid. It weighs, I think, about 19 or 20 ounces, and it's remarkable. It's full-sided. It's very storm-worthy. It's fully enclosed, so the bugs keep out. It's super-duper waterproof because of the material, the neem composite fabric. I wish that it were a little bit bigger. I would gladly take a mid XL that weighed maybe 22 or 24 ounces. But to have all of that performance in this product, you just didn't have that 10, 15, definitely not 20 years ago. Like when I started backpacking, so again, first real backpacking trip, 2002, a waterproof bivy sack weighed as much as this. So a waterproof bivy sack, like an outdoor research bivy, like a mountaineering bivy, that was also like about 1.5 pounds, or about a little bit more than a pound. So I think it was like 18 or 19 ounces. That's what I carry for a lot of the Appalachian Trail. And then like the next evolution from that, take like a Mountain Laurel Design Solo Mid, and that's 14 ounces for the fly in silicone impregnated nylon, and another like say 10 or 12 ounces for the body. You're at about 2 pounds, or like 1/2 pound, 3/4 pound more than this. And that was 2010. That was like where the technology was at. So yeah, it definitely, you can go lighter now than you could in the past without cutting in on safety or efficiency or fun or comfort, but there's still ultimately going to be limits. When you go stupid light, you end up giving up important performance criteria that make your backpacking experience better. And one of the things that you could very easily compromise would be functionality. So as an example, modern backpacks, almost all of them are going to have side pockets and hip out pockets. You might be tempted to say, well, like think about the weight I could save if I just remove this piece of fabric and this piece of fabric. You could save yourself maybe like 1 ounce. There's probably 1 ounce in the zipper and the straw cord. But think about all the functionality that you would be giving up. You're giving up an accessible place to put a water bottle or to put a map. These hip belt pockets are also very convenient for putting things like your sunscreen or some hand sanitizer and some hand soap for your backcountry bidet. So again, a little bit of weight here added to this backpack goes a long way in just improving its functionality. And I think a stupid ultralight or stupid light design decision would be for this backpack manufacturer to not include these things. Another good example of being stupid light would be carrying a small one-person shelter on a trip where you're expecting to have a lot of inclement weather. So if you look carefully at the specs of shelters, one of the key things to look at is the size of the floor. And what you'll notice is that like a lot of manufacturers, they cut weight out of their shelter by just making it smaller. So specifically, like you might see a shelter where the footprint is exactly 20 inches wide at the foot. So, and that means that it can barely fit a normal sleeping pad. And there's effectively like no extra interior room. Same thing with the at the head. Maybe they've generously have it like 22 inches or 24 inches, but again, like just basically no interior room. So you think you're carrying a very lightweight or an ultralight shelter, but you get in there and you realize that it's ultralight because it's ultra small. And if you're in inclement weather where there's a lot of rain or maybe high winds and you need to be able to get into your shelter and do things besides just sleep, it can be pretty challenging to do that in one of these ultralight shelters. Another performance characteristic that you might be giving up by going stupid light would be reliability. And a good example here would be down insulation. Now, when dry, goose down is warmer for its weight than synthetic insulation. However, in really wet environments, so I'm thinking you're hiking the Lost Coast Trail on the coastal California in March while there's some big low coming in off the Pacific, the goose down, it just absorbs that ambient humidity. Even if it doesn't get wet from rain, it will just absorb that ambient humidity and it will get flat and kind of lifeless. And it's just not a reliable insulator in really wet environments. So yes, you could save yourself a little bit of weight on this trip by carrying down insulation, but you're going to pay for it in that because the reliability of that insulation isn't very good. Now, I don't want to be too hard on down because on almost all of my trips, I go with down. You'll often hear the manufacturers of sleeping bags and garments insulated with synthetic insulation as being warm when wet. Well, I'll just be honest with you, like there's no insulation that is warm when wet. It just defies the laws of physics. So don't think that you can get a synthetic sleeping bag or a synthetic insulated jacket like soaking wet or even like really damp and it's going to perform as well as when it's dry. It just won't be the case. But it certainly is the case that synthetic insulations are going to be more resilient in really wet conditions. Durability is another performance characteristic that you might be giving up by going stupid light. And a good example here would be with rain gear. So this rain jacket, I think this weighs maybe like 5 ounces or 6 ounces, but it's made out of this really lightweight fabric. And if you were to carry this jacket on a trip where there's any kind of bushwhacking, or if you carried this jacket on a really long trip where you're going to be using it day in, day out for weeks or months on end, or if you're carrying it on a trip where there's heavy rain, you're going to find the limits of this jacket. It's going to tear while you're bushwhacking, and so you're going to end up losing time stitching it back together, or your rain jacket, it's going to have holes in it. The fabric itself also is going to be less water resistant. And notice that I'm saying water resistant and not waterproof because all rain jackets will hit their limit. They're like waterproofness limit. So this jacket isn't going to keep you as dry for as long if you're in really wet conditions. And then the last thing is that if you are carrying this jacket for a really long trip, it just isn't going to support the day in, day use wear that a heavier duty jacket would. So this rain jacket here, this would be another example of going stupid light. or something that weighs just a little bit more. So instead of 6 ounces, maybe it's 10 ounces. But with 10 ounces, you're going to get a much more robust face fabric. Maybe it's 30 denier instead of like a 10 denier. You're going to get a thicker membrane, which is where all the waterproof breathability action is. And you might also get a legitimate material, like an actual liner fabric on the inside, rather than just whatever this little thing is here that doesn't actually protect the membrane from the use. Another consideration when selecting gear is going to be ease of use. And you might be able to save weight with a particular item, but you might be sort of compromising how just easy and friendly it is to the actual user. And an example here would be guideline for your shelters. So the guideline that I typically recommend, this is a nylon sheath, 2.5 millimeter. This is actually probably a 3 millimeter. And you can tie knots in this really easily. It doesn't have a pre-existing shape. If you have gloved hands, you can still use it. If your hands are cold, there's enough cord here to grab onto, even if you don't have great dexterity. This fabric or this cord, it's a little bit heavier than this cord here. This is an off-brand. It's pure Dyneema accessory cord. The acronym is UHMWPE. It's 10 times stronger than steel for its weight. But the problem with a cord like this, and there are even lighter weight or even thinner versions that are plenty strong. Like there's plenty of holding strength for a shelter. But when you start getting into cords that are this thin, and this one here, I think this is 1.6 millimeter, you just give up some of that usability. It doesn't hold knots as well. It's very slippery. It's not as easy to use when your hands are cold or when your hands are gloved. So it's just one of those trade-off things. You're like, well, I guess I could save, a couple of grams by using this blue cord instead of the orange cord. But man, a couple of grams to kind of have a lot more fuss when it comes to my guidelines, it's probably just not worth it. One thing that you want to be thinking about when selecting gear is going to be the versatility of it. I'm going to keep using this shelter as a model to give you other examples of stupid light. And a product like this, again, this is the Hyperlight Mountain Gear Mid 1. It weighs 20 ounces. It's a really wonderful shelter, but it's a single wall. So it has the rainfly and the bug netting, or the inner. Those two pieces are connected. For probably like 4 to 6 ounces more, you could have a more modular system. So you could have a mid-shaped tarp, and then you could have an inner that's made entirely out of bug mesh with a waterproof bottom. And that's a little bit of extra weight, but that modularity could be really valuable on either on a really long hike where you're seeing a range of conditions. So for example, suppose that you start the trip in the wintertime and you only want to bring the fly because you don't need a bug inner when it's winter. And then spring arrives and it's bug season now, so you bring that inner out with you. And then as you move into the fall, you realize you don't need the bug inner anymore, but you just want a ground sheet. So that more modular system, it's going to be a little bit heavier, all things being equal, because of mostly just that extra material. But it's a much more versatile shelter than this all-in-one product that's all integrated, that's a little bit more of like a one-trick pony. Weight isn't just the most important thing, but another important consideration would be efficiency, just being time efficient. Another good example of this, and I don't have one to illustrate it, but would be a hard-sided bear canister versus a bear hang. So if you have ever tried to hang food well in a tree, it takes time. You have to go walk around in the woods finding the perfect tree, and then you need to find a rock or a stick to tie the rope to, and then you try to throw it over the perfect limb, and usually you mess up a time or two because Maybe the first time the rock just flies out of the string because you didn't tie it well, and then the second time you miss, and then third time you finally get it right. And then you spend all this time like creating, like pulling it up and tying it off, and it's even more time if you want to do a counterbalance method or the Pacific Crest or the PCT method. That's another style of bear hanging. So you look at all the time that you just spent in camp hanging your food. It's a minimum of a half an hour. Versus carrying just a hard-sided bear canister, which like they're not great. They weigh at least 2 pounds, and you've had to carry it all day long. But I would be willing to bet that carrying 2 extra pounds, depending on how much you weigh, like I'm 160-ish, so it's probably it's like less than 2% of my body weight. Carrying a bear canister is probably more time efficient than hanging my food every night because I have all that time I waste. In comparison, a bear canister, you pull into camp, you pull it out of your backpack, you cook dinner, and then after dinner, you put it 10 or 15 yards away from your camp and you're done. It takes basically no time at all. Final example of stupid light that I'll provide you, and hopefully you might have some of your own, would be, this was a trip in 2010. I was with Roman Dial, and we were in Alaska on a pretty aggressive pack rafting and backpacking trip. And as we're gearing up for it, we decided that we didn't both need a cook set. We could just carry just one pot, and we carried this one. So it's 900 milliliter pot for 2 adult men. And at the end of the trip, Roman referred to that decision as gram wise and hour foolish, because every camp we just wasted so much time cooking dinner twice. Coffee in the morning, it was like he would cook coffee and then I would cook coffee. And then when we pull into camp, he would cook dinner and then I would cook dinner. It was just kind of foolish. This pot weighs 4 ounces, 5 ounces. Then I have my caldera cone, which is, probably like an ounce. Then my stove, which is less than an ounce. So it's probably like, 7 ounces or so. Yeah, we saved ourselves 7 ounces. Congratulations. And we spent probably an extra hour a day cooking because of that decision. So through this episode, I've been a little hard on going stupid light, but there actually is one benefit of pushing the limits. And it's that you at least know what you don't want to give up. Once you've gone out backpacking and you've tried to sleep on a closed cell phone pad because it's lighter weight than a NeoAir, or once you've shared one cook pot with 2 adult males, or once you've gone on a trip without a coffee mug, or once you have tried to set up or pitch your shelter on rocky ground with titanium skewers and then had them at least one pull out in the middle of the night and had your shelter fall down. After you've made those mistakes, you can kind of come back from the edge. And then you can recreate your backpack that accounts for a little bit more than just being as light as possible. A backpack or a kit that overall will make you more comfortable. It'll allow you to have more fun. It'll keep you safer and just overall lead to a better backpacking experience and make you want to do it more often instead of feeling like every time you go out, you just suffer. It's important maybe to point out that there's not a absolute definition of stupid light. What might be gram-wise hour foolish for one person might not be that case for another person. And I think maybe the variable that will influence your definition most will be how much time are you spending walking every day versus how much time you're spending in camp. Someone who's spending their whole day walking, so basically if they're not walking, that means they're either sleeping or they're eating or they're pooping, but otherwise they're walking. That person is going to err more towards saving as much weight as possible because that's where they're finding, by carrying less, they're maximizing their comfort because they're just walking with less is more comfortable. On the flip side, someone who's spending more time in camp, someone who's walking slower, someone who's on a less aggressive itinerary, your definition of stupid light is going to be, you're going to be more aggressive with it because not carrying, say, a Kindle on a trip where you're spending a lot of time in camp, just where you want to read, you'd be pretty disappointed if you didn't carry your Kindle. Or maybe if you're an avid birder it would be stupid light to not carry a good pair of binoculars, as opposed to something like, ultralight without very good glass and with small diameter telescoping lenses types things. Obviously, like, haven't gone down the rabbit hole on high-end binoculars. So again, the important takeaway here is just that your definition of stupid light might differ from someone else's definition of stupid ultralight, and probably the biggest difference will just be in where you want to be comfortable out on the trail. What would I say to the gram-obsessed Andrew Skurka from 20 years ago? I would tell that young 20-something that, you might think you're something right now, but you still have a lot to learn. Hope you enjoyed this episode. This is part of a weekly series that I do at the Trek. We drop a new video Monday at noon Mountain Time every week. If you liked it, please click that like button. And if you are enjoying this series, please go ahead and subscribe. For more information about my guided trips, you can visit my website, andrewskurka.com. Thanks, and we'll see you next week. We would love to hear your stories about the time when you went stupid light. A lot of them are pretty funny and also educational for other viewers. So please go ahead and share with us your best story in the comments section. If you tell us the best stupid light story, we will send you one of these Trek branded buffs. I look forward to reading them.